My name is Jackie Palfi, and this is the Cycle of Success podcast. I am certain that you can make life more than just a living. You can achieve more by doing less. My mission is to help you create abundance in all areas of life without you burning out. So what are you waiting for? All we have is right now. Welcome back to the Cycle of Success podcast. I am very, very happy to be able to introduce to you a beautiful soul who's here as a guest on the podcast today. We have with us Spencer Snakard. Is that right?
Snakard, yes. It's a little doozy of a name. Yes.
Spencer Snakard. And she's an executive transformation coach, trainer, and speaker. And I remember first time we met online and we had our pre-call, something that really stuck with me, Spencer, was a sentence that you said that I have used as well in my training, but the way you explained it just went even deeper into my soul. And this sentence was, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So with that, I'll just like to, turn the ball over to you, let you introduce yourself properly, and maybe even start this podcast off with, how do you understand this phrase?
Yeah, thank you so much. So first I have to just acknowledge I can't claim ownership of that. That was stated by a French philosopher many, many years ago. Yeah. And yeah, I just love it. And I feel like it's become such a basis of the work that I've been doing. Really the last year or so, it's evolved quite a bit. And that quote has really helped shift things for me of it's something that's always rung true for me and that I've connected with, but it just is like coming alive for me in a whole new way of, we are spiritual beings first and foremost. And in this, our spiritual beingness is having this human experience. And, so much of the work that I do lately and helping people really step into all of who they are and all of what they really want and all of what they feel called to in life, in this life that we're living, I think really is about bringing that into full expression. And so it's really come from me where I feel like we've got this, it's almost like there's this inherent conflict within us between who we are as spiritual beings on one side and who we are as human beings. Because in our spiritual existence, I think that we are limitless. We are magnificent and whole and complete and divine. And dare I even say, this is going to blow some minds, perfect, really perfect for all that we are and for all that we are and all that we're not. And not in the sense of cultural perfection, like 2.5 kids and the perfect job and perfect car and perfect vacations. But, gosh, I feel like I couldn't even get those words out. It was like I was choking on them. But really like embracing the perfection of this divine, magnificent creation that you are. But being housed in these breakable human bodies, there are things that happen like fear and doubt and feelings of not being enough or not measuring up in some way. And, I had this realization a few months ago now where I was like, in some ways we're kind of not enough. And I don't really believe that we're not. I just mean that in the sense of in our human experience, it's like we have this constant moment by moment reminder that we're limited in this vessel that we're in and on this earth that we're living in and laws of gravity and things like that. But our true existence, who we truly are in a spiritual nature, is limitless. And so I think that sort of creates this conflict of like, oh my gosh, why can I not do more? Why can I not be more? And so we need to really find ways to fully integrate those two parts of ourselves so we can bring that full spiritual expression and full spiritual experience into our whole human existence.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I loved the way you put it all together. I also absolutely believe, especially what you said about being perfect in our spiritual spirit. Yes. I believe, I always say that our spiritual DNA is absolutely perfect.
Oh, I love that.
And I think it's such a beautiful truth to realize. And it's the first step to really expressing your true nature. And then I also really love how you bring in the human nature in this as a creating a conflict, I think that is a very special way of understanding why many people might be stuck and feeling overwhelmed. Because I see two kind of people. One kind who hasn't recognized this truth that there are spiritual beings and they are very limited because they're just living life through circumstances. And then there's this other part of other group of people who want things too much because they know the limitlessness, but their fear is kind of, still getting in their way.
Yes.
So this is the two groups I really see a lot. How would you work with these two groups in aligning both of their nature?
Yeah. Well, I almost always start off with the people that with my clients or even in my course when I'm just sort of teaching these foundational concepts of my methodology. One of the places that we do start as a first step, and I got goosebumps actually when you said about perfection being that first step. I'm like, oh, I found my soul sister here. Because I've actually even been playing with the term, the perfection principle, because a principle is like a foundation or a bedrock to stand on and to build from. And so I really am looking at it like that is the foundational principle. And so I do certainly bring that in as an early introduction for people, but some people initially aren't quite ready to really like soak that in and embrace that. And so we look at, one of the early things I look at is what do you really want within the alignment piece? To me, I think those break down into who we really are as spiritual beings, which is where perfection and many other aspects play into that. What you're here for, meaning like your purpose or your soul's calling. And that doesn't have to mean that you're going to live like Mother Teresa. It might be just the kind of mom you are, the kind of spouse you are, the kind of community member you are, but bringing that sense of what you're here for into your expression. And then really what matters most. And to me, that what matters most to you, defined by you. And to me, that's about your values and your desires. And so a lot of times where I start with people is on that what matters most part of, okay, let's start with like, if you had a magic wand and could design your life any way you want it to be, what would it look like? Don't tell me about the limitations. Don't tell me about the quote unquote realities. Let's get into what do you really want? And then we'll figure out if or how we can move things out of the way. And really for me, I feel like there's always a how to move things out of the way.
Absolutely. I love that. And I also always say, put the how on hold. We'll focus on the what. Do you feel like that because I experience this, that many people even stumble upon that because we have learned that we close down our imagination even before we allow ourselves to dream that big because right away we're just telling ourselves it's not possible. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because when I teach this as a somewhat more linear methodology, because we got to start somewhere and work through kind of step by step. And so when I teach it as a methodology, I start with the alignment piece, but I often find after we go through the humanity piece on having the insight and, the aspects of our humanity that can get in the way of that, we often kind of have to come back to the alignment part because then they're like, ooh, I wasn't thinking big enough. Because a big part of the insight piece for me is really getting into like part of that for people. I think when you said like, they don't see the possibility for it or they think, oh no, that can't be. It's like I think the phrase you used was they lack the imagination, but I see it as part of our design to keep us safe, to keep us alive, to keep us from the saber-toothed tigers hauling us off and having us for dinner is we love to be right. We need really in many ways to be right. And so it's part of our just wiring of our mind and of our thinking. And part of that is like, there's so many bits of information going in at a time. I know your background is in psychology, right? Yeah. So I know you know this, but for your listeners who may not know this, there's so many bits of information coming in all the time. It's like it would be complete overwhelm if all of those things were coming in. And so our brain sort of adapts by filtering out the things that don't fit or the things that don't matter to our survival. And so it kind of narrows it down from these millions of bits of information to maybe a couple hundred bits of information at a time. And with that filtering, it's like we're looking for more evidence of what we already think or what we think we already know. And so I think a lot of times that lack of imagination is just based on those already existing beliefs that just have been validated over time. And really, whether they're accurate or not, or really quote unquote true or not, it's like we build up mountains of evidence for how right we are and how true it is and how we couldn't possibly do that, or how this is the way the world is, or this is who I am, all of those things. And so that's a big piece of that second area for me on the humanity is, okay, let's look at what's really true here. What, of the world that you know it and who you are as you know it, how much of that is really you and how much of that is just stuff that you've kind of collected over time.
I love the way you phrase things. I really love the way you were
Thank you.
teaching it. It really also touches my heart and just is so understandable for everyone. And what really, what I was thinking while you were talking is that, you talked about first going through humanity and then going back to the spirit, because people are like, okay, well, I didn't think big enough.
Right.
And I think here the key point is the fact that it's never about what we are then achieving, but the journey, the process, right? Because if we imagine everything being like every result we're having being like frequencies of vibrations, then every time we reach one, we realize, oh, we could have gone there. And we will always want to go further and further because our spirit is forever more expanded for your fuller version of itself, right?
Yes. And in fact, it's interesting too, again, with the psychology connection with you, because now I'm on many of these shows and I don't always have that same, I have a undergraduate degree in psychology, but I didn't do it as a practitioner. But one of the things I've been looking at with very different eyes lately is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, with really simplifying it to who we are as spiritual beings and who we are as human beings, those first, I think initially I know it was 8 levels. I think it's been kind of narrowed down to 5. Those first 4 levels are really all of our human survival needs. Even the aspects of belonging and acceptance and prestige and accomplishment, those still are those human survival needs that really some of those higher human survival needs kind of get taken over by our identity, who we think we are, how we show up as like the super achiever or the amazing mom or the supportive one or whatever it may be. But those are the human needs. And then the top level with self-actualization is that spiritual expression. And I looked at it again recently and was reminded of how those lower level needs, it's like the more you have it, the less you're motivated to get more of it because you don't need it. It's like, okay, the need has been met. And yet the self-actualization one about our spiritual expression, the more you have, the more motivated you are to create more of it. And I get goosebumps talking about it. I'm like, that's like that draw, that calling that so many of us have to like do more, be. Now, some of us, it may be those human ones like the identity trying to prove ourselves of being more, but at that higher level, that spiritual expression need, it's like this ongoing calling to be like, okay, let me be bigger. Let me see what else I can do with this miraculous nature that I am.
Yeah, and that is when it really moves into flow when you have that feeling, because I really find often in clients that they are so stuck in their human nature of not allowing themselves to grow more because they feel themselves as being selfish or needy or greedy, whatever they would call themselves, right? Yeah. And just holding yourself back because of that is being stuck in what you have created around you, which you didn't even choose yourself. It was just a programming into your subconscious mind.
Yes.
So I would love to know how you work around with your clients around that, because I love when I see the transformation of a client really moving into this flow and then creating. But sometimes it is quite a hurdle, to get them into that other side. So what do you do when people just are really stuck in their circumstances and in their old way of thinking? How do you work with them?
So a couple of things that initially come to mind are, one, helping people understand that what you think or what you believe is not necessarily the truth with a capital T. And it's funny, I said one time I was on with a client on one of our first phone calls, and she wasn't even a client yet. It was like a strategy or an exploratory session. And she said something about a thought, and without even thinking about it, I just kind of almost muttered under my breath, well, just because you think a thought doesn't make it true. And she told me later, we did end up working together, and she told me months later, she's like, Spencer, when you said that, I literally had to sit down because I felt the earth shake under my feet. She was like, it had never occurred to me before that a thought in my head was anything other than true. So even just to start recognizing those thoughts we have, which oftentimes are disempowering thoughts, oftentimes they're fear-based thoughts, which again goes to our survival, because and so that's kind of a next piece of it is really helping my clients to have compassion for our humanity. I'm not demonizing the humanity of, oh, your humanity is ruining your spiritual expression. I don't mean it that way at all, but having the compassion to recognize and understand what's driving it and go, oh, that's me trying to protect myself or trying to help myself. Or I was kind of thrown back into my 5-year-old moment there of being scared in the great big world and not sure if I could make it. And this sort of automatic, like you said, this sort of automatic programming kicked in. So really having the compassion, because I think as long as we sit in judgment of it, it's much more difficult to see, because it's like, if I see it and I think it's bad, then it means I'm bad. Or that's how we interpret it, is that it means, I therefore must be bad and wrong for having these thoughts or living this way or doing this thing. But if we can have the compassion to recognize like, oh, that's the machinery taking place. That's what that is. And now that I see that, who do I choose to be? Which direction do I choose to take this? And I have a great example that came to mind right away when you asked about a client who, when she first came to me, she excuse me, she's an entrepreneur, and she had been in business for 8 years, I think, at that point, and struggle to make any money financially for a long time. She had just gotten to where she was making about $10,000 a month. And she said right away, she's like, but I'm not one of those people who wants to make $1 million. And I was like, oh, really? Not that I had judgment about it, but I was curious. And I said, oh, really? Why is that? And she was like, well, more money and bigger business equals bigger problems. And found out she'd been in a relationship with someone she'd had a business with, and it did grow to over $1 million a year. And the bigger the business got, the more difficult their relationship got. And she ended up walking away from the whole thing. And I said, it seems like there's a little bit of a kind of an either or thing going on here. Like you have it like either you can be successful and wealthy and independent, or you can have a great relationship. And she was like, well, yeah. I mean, it was just kind of like, duh. And when she thought about it, she said, when I think about it, there's only 2 families my whole life I can think of that were happily married and had a, happy family. But she said they were stone cold broke. And, the friends in that family could never do anything fun. Like they couldn't go on trips with me, or they couldn't go to a movie or whatever, because they could never afford it. So she's like, I don't want that. And so it was really like this, almost like a seesaw, I can't do it on the video here. My arms are all goofy, but it's kind of this, if one thing, the higher one side gets, the lower the other side gets. And so she was keeping everything just kind of mediocre, because if one area got too good, it meant the other area was going to get bad. And when we talked about that, it was so great. She came back the next week and she's like, I was on a plane last week and I saw all these really happy couples in first class. And she's like, if they're in first class, they must have money. And they looked really happy. I've never even noticed that before. So it really started shifting her thinking. And within a matter of months, her income was consistently going up. By the time we stopped working together, I think she was consistently hitting about $20,000 months. And she had a huge spike since then, where she even peaked at $90,000 one month from the woman who said she didn't want to make $1 million a year. And she's like, maybe that's not such a bad thing anymore. And she's been in a relationship with someone for almost a year now who's fabulous and adores her and supports her fully in her career as well, which is what she was worried about, was like a good relationship would mean I have to be stuck at home as a housewife, which she didn't. For her, that was a certain interpretation of what that meant for lack of freedom, lack of ability to travel, things like that she didn't want. So anyway, she's having it all now.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think that is a perfect example of how we just accept a reality,
yes,
and then create more of it. And it goes back to this part of our brain that you talked about before, that when we have accepted one reality to be true, that is what we see more of.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know what reality you have accepted for yourself yet, you can try this part of the brain out. I mean, I had it as I wanted to become pregnant. Suddenly I saw pregnant ladies everywhere.
Yes.
Somebody wanting a car, you see red cars everywhere. So it
yes.
is a part of our brain that shows you more of what you want. So
yes,
if we live in a world where anything is possible, why don't you just decide, just like you said before, on what you would love, and then start creating that instead of just accepting something to be true.
Yes.
So I think this client story was an absolutely beautiful example of exactly that. And something else I also would love to underline of what you said is, these two sides of us, that we should acknowledge both of them. I always like to say it, like I always say that we have two sides of us, and it's whether we choose to partner up with one of them or the other, but they're both there. And it's about not, like I call it fear, or the part of us that wants the dream. And the fear will always be there. We will not create our dream in the absence of fear, but we won't let it stay in the driver's seat. It's just gonna be there, and we're gonna, recognize it and create a dream life, even though it's there. So I just really love that you brought that up as well, because I'm a huge believer of that. And I talk about it a lot for my audience, and the way you just explained it, I'm certain that it just, gets even more under the skin of people. And it also just shows that this is the truth, and this is the way that you can, create your dream life, to recognize it and then choose who you want to be and who you want to partner up with.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I absolutely loved what you just told us, also with an example. Let's continue maybe on your journey a little bit, Spencer. Like, what's up for you? What is the next project for you? And what is something you really, really love doing right now?
Yeah. That was a lot. So I'm going to start with the last thing when you said, what do I really love doing right now? I have really been loving being home with my family, believe it or not.
Yes.
It's funny. Some people I think are kind of like reaching sort of their limit on that after a year or so of sort of almost feeling quote unquote stuck at home. But my kids have been doing virtual school all year. And it's, they're one just turned 17 and the other's about to turn 14. And I just feel so blessed that I have teenagers that actually like will talk to me and like to hang out with me. And they'll come down sometimes between classes and give me hugs and stuff. And I've just been really enjoying having them around, especially during this time of their lives when, I think it's sort of like a hidden gift, a little of COVID-19. And I know many people have suffered immensely as a result of it. But we've been fortunate thus far in that we haven't been sick and we've been able to continue our businesses. And we've had some of these sort of added perks of like being able to have time together and just really cherish each other in ways that sometimes normal life seems to make more challenging. So that's been good. The big project I have coming up is I'm launching a new program, which is like an executive level coaching and training and masterminding program for upper level women leaders, conscious leaders and entrepreneurs both, but sort of this common thread of like upper level leadership and really wanting to shake up the status quo and change, quote unquote, the way it is in the world, especially in the areas of social justice like racism, sexism, ageism, things like that, and really transforming kind of how we exist as a humanity and as a society. And so anyway, I'm excited about that. So I've been running a new masterclass to allow people to kind of get a sense of really going deeper into these areas that we've been talking about today, but also be able to kind of see for yourself where you're aligned or maybe not so aligned and in what areas. Sometimes like professional can be great, but maybe personal not so much, or vice versa. Or sometimes a lot of things can be great, but health can be sliding or getting neglected, that sort of thing. So really being able to see where you are in alignment as far as who you are and what you're here for and what matters most, are all three of those really firing on all three cylinders, and being able to understand the pieces that get in the way of that and what's needed to then bring it all together and really develop a sense of mastery to be able to keep bringing that full self-expression and that possibility and that ability to create into life.
Awesome. That sounds so interesting. And would you mind sharing 1-2 gold nuggets from that masterclass? And then I know that you have a special invitation for everyone listening here, and I will put it in the show notes in case people want to, dig even deeper in the work with you and also have an assessment and look at their own life in terms of where they are. They can join you in the masterclass. But just to give a little taste of it, would you mind sharing 1-2 gold nuggets of what you're teaching in that masterclass?
Yeah. A big part of it that I go further into, which I think you sort of touched on as well with some of what you mentioned here, but we go much further into it, is that part of our humanity that really is sort of survival driven and drives the fear needs. We talk about your identity and how your identity can sort of take over and, like you said, be the one in the driver's seat unknowingly in the driver's seat. So we talk more about that, really kind of explaining what's going on with that and how to recognize when that's what's happening. And also, I also go into an example of how sometimes there can be kind of this overlap between how we show up spiritually and how that identity shows up. It makes sense to me that the identity, it's, that phrase, like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It sort of makes sense to me that the identity doesn't fall far from the spiritual tree. And so sometimes there can be some commonalities to it. But I make the distinction of how you can recognize, okay, well, which one's driving the show? Is this coming from the spiritually freed up, perfect, magnificent, divine part of me? Or is this coming from the more fear-based, I'm not enough and I need to prove something part of me? So gives them tools to be able to see that. And that knowledge is power. Just to be able to identify that a lot of times can completely turn things around.
That's amazing. And everyone listening right now, you can already know feel the love and knowledge also about these areas that Spencer has. And I can really also tell that you talk from experience. And I feel
I
like
laugh because I have a little bit of a personal thing going on right now that I'm using my own tools and techniques to work through.
And that's, that's so important. And that is the authentic part. And I honestly believe that the best coaches out there are people who speak from experience.
Yes.
So what I just wanted to say with this is that I feel it in my heart, and I'm sure that everybody listening feels it too. So if you feel any kind of, longing or just a little spike inside of you wanting to touch more upon this and figuring out if you're aligned or how you could get more aligned, then I just want to make a call to action here again in where you can find Spencer's masterclass. It's in my show notes, and I'm sure that she would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have if anything came up. Something that just came to me, just very spontaneous question that I'm really curious about is that I know you have 5 children, right? It's 5 children?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and they're older now. And I know that you've been an entrepreneur for a longer time. Like, what would you say that you would have loved to know as you became a mother or became a mompreneur and your children were still young, that you know now that could have helped you back in the days?
I think the biggest thing is cherish the moments. I really, in fact, in all honesty, a big part of what I'll say is, especially if you are becoming a mompreneur, get a coach. Because I started my first business when my first daughter was newborn. I was building a yoga studio at the time while I was also working full time in a corporate career, and started building the yoga studio. And I was on the 5-year plan to transition out of corporate and have my studio replace my corporate salary. And 15 years later, I know maybe not 15. I did it for 15 years, but I think around the 12 or 13 year mark as she was going into middle school, and I still was working corporate and had not replaced that money. I was like, isn't this interesting? Like, talk about feeling out of alignment. I was like, the whole reason I was growing this business was to have more time with my kids. And I've been working and working and working and working with this goal of when I get there, when I cross this finish line, then I'll be able to have more time. And I certainly made efforts along the way. I'm not saying I was a total workaholic who never paid attention to them, but in hindsight, I look back and I, one of the biggest things is I recognize I had a major block, a belief or something that was getting in the way for me with my studio being more successful that I was totally blind to. And had I had a coach, I would have seen that much sooner. And I think I could have either, 1, made the studio more successful, or 2, said, maybe this isn't the way I want to go, and I'm going to just do the corporate thing and just have more, just do my 9 to 5 and have my evenings and weekends totally free. But it was one of these, someone had said something early on in me teaching yoga. A studio owner made a very felt like dripping with judgment statement about, I would never hire someone who's doing it just for the money. And, part of me consciously is like, who cares if I am doing it for the money to begin with? Cause I got to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads. And there's nothing wrong with that. So consciously, that was the first thing. The second thing was, and I'm not doing it just for the money. I love what I'm doing. And in hindsight, looking back, I realized there was this subconscious fear running under the water that I had no idea was going on. That was like, I made darn sure that nobody ever questioned whether I was doing it just for the money. So I kept that financial ceiling rather low for that business because I didn't want people to be like, oh my gosh, you're making how much doing yoga? Oh, you must be, driven by money. So again, consciously, when I even say it out loud, I'm like, that sounds so silly because consciously I didn't think that way at all, but I think it was totally interfering. And so back to the, as people that are maybe starting out, have young kids, 1, get a coach. And 2, make sure that as you're growing your business, a big thing I really help my clients with is no matter what stage they're at or what age their kids are, I'm a huge proponent of design the life you want and then design a business that fits into that instead of designing the business or the career or the job path you want and then trying to squeeze your life around that. Design the life you want first, and then we figure out the details of the rest of it.
I absolutely love that. I would like to underline 2 things that you said. One of them was what I just really heard that you say, I made a 5-year
plan.
Yeah, sorry. It was just my
little... There's your guy. He's ready. He's like, Mom, you're done.
Yeah, but he's back at sleeping now. Just for everyone listening who didn't see the video, it was my baby phone, but back to business. He's sleeping again. So I heard you say that you had a 5-year plan. And I honestly feel like that already, like that is those are red
flag.
Yeah, when somebody comes, because when you have a 5-year plan, you're planning to make a quantum leap with the mindset that you have right now.
Yes.
And the mindset you have right now is never going to get your dream. You're just going to drag along. And that's kind of what I heard you also, do here. And that ties together with, that it's always a subconscious thing, and the subconscious programming really controls 96% of our behaviors. So we can know all these things in our consciousness. And I know everyone listening kind of know what to do right now to get a little bit closer to your dream, but you're not doing it because what drives your behavior mostly is your subconscious mind. So I'm also a huge believer of get a coach. Every coach needs a coach as well. And so I absolutely love what you just said there. I agree completely to it. Yeah. And I do have a last question that I ask all my podcast interview guests, and I really love to end off with this. Mm-hmm. I would like you to imagine, Spencer, that anything you've ever written, created, anything that came from your, creation was destroyed in a fire. It just all disappears. And then I would give you a piece of paper and a pen, and I would ask you to put down 3 things on this paper that you would like to leave the world behind with the day you're not here anymore. What would you put on that paper?
Wow. That's deep. Brilliant question. I think probably the biggest, most important one is what we discussed earlier. Of you are a perfect, whole, complete, divine creation of God, universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it. It's not about religion or doctrine for me, but you are perfect and whole and complete exactly as you are, and for all that you are and for all that you're not. And there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to fill in. There's nothing to make up for. You just be fully you, and all the rest just works itself out. I think I would also say live your life for what matters to you, not what you think other people want or expect, or what you should do or what you need to do. I mean, certainly, yes, we have responsibilities and we should be decent human beings to other people and that sort of thing. I don't mean be a selfish jerk, but I think kind of listen. Maybe this is the third thing. Maybe that leads to the third thing, which is to say, listen to your gut, whatever that means for you. For some people, it's like a feeling in your stomach. Some people, it's like the hair standing up on the back of your neck. But figure out what your signal is when your soul or your spirit or your intuition is talking to you, and trust yourself.
That's So deep and so important. Love them. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's been an honor for me to have you here, Spencer, and have this conversation with you. And I really want to deeply thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. It's so important. And I know that you are a part of the world healing with the work you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I feel exactly the same about you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.